Welcome to this episode of my podcast. My name is Kalsoom, and I specialize in training medical professionals how to get the score they need in IELTS or OET so that they can get their dream job, take their career to the next level, and start living their best life with their families by providing them with bigger and better opportunities. Before I start with the main topic for this week's episode, I just want to make you aware of how you can use this podcast to your maximum advantage. This is no ordinary podcast. You can use this podcast by one, simply listening to the podcast to get some advice that will help you in your IELTS or OET preparation. Number two, actively listening to this podcast to improve your listening skills. I try to keep it short. I know you guys are very busy people, but you can use it for focused listening practice. So you can use the show notes, which is a complete transcript of each episode. You can read the episode as you listen and analyze the language, learn new words or phrases, practice pronunciation and intonation. Number three, also included in the show notes are some comprehension style questions that you can use by reading the transcript, using your skimming and scanning techniques to answer the questions. Answers are provided at the end, but you can also check your answers by listening to the podcast. Number four, you can use it as a listening test and answer the same questions while listening. And number five, I also include a brief analysis of some useful words or phrases that I have used in the podcast, which you can learn. So it's up to you how you would like to use this tool. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your colleagues and social media so that more people can benefit from it too. Hi, and welcome to this episode. I hope your preparation is going well. Before we get into the topic of this episode, a few reminders as always. In the show notes, you will find links to my free OET training called Preparing for OET Success. The training is a series of 5 videos that take you through all aspects of the test and explains exactly how you should be preparing for each test in a lot of detail. I've had amazing reviews from people who have gone through that training. And just by using that training alone, they were able to improve their grades, their results for OET. So it's, it really is a comprehensive guide, so well worth going through. You'll also find links to my free Facebook groups, my free Facebook study groups for both OET and IELTS. Also my email address and other ways you can contact me in case you have any questions. You will also find a link to my OET membership group. This is my paid membership group. It's a pay monthly group. And this is where all the real work happens. So where we study strategies and skills, we work on our vocabulary and grammar, and it's where my students receive all the feedback that they need to improve their scores. It's a private space where students find not only support from me, but from their peers around the world. So if you would like to train with me for your OET on a daily basis, then the link is there for you to sign up. So the topic of this episode, I'm sure you're going to find really useful and practical. It's all about creating and building up a bank of language, a language bank, just for OET. So this episode is for OET. I will make a separate episode that's relevant to IELTS, but this one is all about OET. So it's all about creating and building up a language bank, not just for OET, but beyond that as well. So it will also help you in preparing for the language that is needed for PLAB 2, for the PLAB 2 exam. And ultimately, even beyond that, it will help you prepare for working in an English-speaking country. So whether that's the UK
or Canada, Australia, wherever you choose to go. It will help you improve your language skills beyond the tests that you have to do into your practical life. And like I mentioned, this episode is going to be specifically for OET students, and I will do exactly the same using relevant examples for IELTS students. So what exactly do I mean by a language bank? What do I mean by that? Well, what I don't mean, and this I need to emphasize, what I don't mean is you memorize conversations or you have templates for consultations that you memorize and you just recite parrot fashion in the exam. That's not going to help you get the score that you need. In fact, it's the complete opposite. In the exam, you have no idea what the patient will say to you. You have no idea how they will express themselves, what emotions they will express, much like in the real world and in the PLAB 2 test. And, especially in the real world, and if you are practicing doctors or nurses at the moment, you have no idea what your patient is going to say to you, how they are going to interact with you, what problems they will tell you, what problems they could create for you, and so on. So memorizing whole conversations and repeating them in the test without listening to what the patient is saying to you and responding accordingly, which is what you need to do, will not help you get a good score. It won't help you in PLAB 2, and it definitely will not help you in the real world. Like I said, when you come to the UK, for example, to work, you deal with patients, you wouldn't talk to every patient in exactly the same way. If you think about how you interact with your patients now, you don't talk to every single patient in exactly the same way, using the same phrases over and over again. What you do is you listen to what they say, you understand it, and you respond in the most appropriate way, in a way that addresses their concerns, their emotions, and the situation that you are in. OET and PLAB 2 demand the same thing. They want to see your ability to do this, right? So what do I mean then? What do I mean by this, having this language bank? So what I mean is having stock phrases and expressions that can be used, that you can choose from and use in the most appropriate situations. So different ways of saying the same thing that suit different situations and can be tailored to any situation. So how do you do this? How do you go about doing this? So first of all, the place I would begin is looking at the speaking marking criteria. You can see that the examiner, and I'm talking about the clinical marking criteria, not the linguistic. You can see that the examiner is listening out for certain aspects of the consultation. So I'm just going to give a few examples, but you can go and actually look at this yourself. So for example, eliciting and exploring the patient's ideas, concerns, expectations, right? So let's take reassuring the patient. So with exploring the patient's feelings, you could write a list of different ways you could do that you could explore the patient's feelings. So for example, you could think of different scenarios. So you could say, after giving details of a treatment that they need to undergo or the next steps, after explaining those next steps, you could say, can I ask you how you feel about that? What are your thoughts on this? Or after a patient has described an incident or an event, you could ask them, how did that make you feel? Yeah, so this is you eliciting and exploring the patient's ideas, concerns, and expectations. Let's take a look at reassuring the patient. You could say, I understand that it might seem scary, but it will get easier. Or you could say, it's perfectly normal to be worried. Or you could say, and you know, try not to always rely on saying, let me reassure you, because I think that becomes like the standard thing that everybody says, you know, let me reassure you. Try to think of different ways of saying the same thing. And, you know, you would carry on with the rest of the marking criteria and look at different ways of saying the things that they are looking for there from that marking criteria. And you would carry on for the rest of the marking criteria and build up this bank, this list of expressions and phrases that you can practice using in your speaking practice and in your test. And now what you would do in your practice and in the test is choose the most appropriate expression or phrase to suit who you are talking to, what is being said in the consultation. You know, whatever is appropriate, you would use that expression. But because you've learnt or you've become very familiar with all these different ways of saying all of these things that are on the marking criteria, it becomes very easy for you to pick and choose the right or the, you know, the most appropriate way of responding to your patient. And what it does is it saves time in the test. It saves time because you're not having to think of a good response, of a really a good appropriate response. So this will improve your fluency. It makes you sound more confident. It enables you to demonstrate your range of vocabulary. You know, you're not just saying, let me reassure you. I mean, there's nothing wrong in saying, let me reassure you, but there's only so many times you can say it in the same consultation. And what I find is that students just rely on that. It's become like the standard way of showing reassurance. And it's okay to say it once, nothing wrong with it at all. But then if you've got this bank of other ways of saying it, then it shows the examiner the range of vocabulary that you have, and that you know how to say something in a different way. So it makes you sound more confident. It makes you sound more proficient. And yeah, it makes you more confident because you have this bank of language in your head that you can use whenever you need to. And, you know, try out the other aspects from the marking criteria and the different situations that you know, in your practice, when you're going through a role play, you know, break it down, get each bullet point and, you know, try to write down different ways of responding to that bullet point. You know, how would you explain a treatment? You know, think of different ways of explaining the same treatment. Yeah. And, you know, let me give you some other examples from the marking criteria and, you know, what comes up in the role play. So, for example, dealing with difficult patients. So one scenario that has come up in previous role plays is, you know, you have a patient who you need to persuade. Perhaps they're unwilling to take their medication. You know, they want to stop taking their medication after only taking it for a week because they feel that it's not working properly, that they're not better yet. So they're unwilling to, they've come back to you and they're unwilling to carry on with the medication because they feel it hasn't worked after only just taking it for a week. How would you respond to that patient? How would you persuade that patient that, you know, in a reassuring way, that they must carry on taking it, because the effect of that medication will come only after taking it for a month, for example, or 6 weeks. So you have to think of a way of persuading the patient that they must continue with it. And you must give them that confidence, that reassurance that this is the right course of action. So there's lots of different ways you could express that. So you would write down a list of different ways of doing that. Another example is a patient who is extremely embarrassed about their condition and is finding it difficult to talk about it. How would you give that patient confidence and reassurance, and, give them, reassure them that it's okay to talk about it and that this is confidential, and, what would you say to them? How would you say it? What would be the tone that you use? Yeah, so these are all things you need to think about. Another example, how would you give a patient news that their blood test results show that they have diabetes or high blood pressure? And this is like this would impact their life. They would have to take medication on a long-term basis. And this is something that they would have to manage. How would you break that news to them? And then how would you explain what the next steps are? How would you give that reassurance? Another example, how would you tell a patient that they need to change their diet? This is always something that needs to be done very tactfully. That they need to eat more healthy food, or that they need to lose weight. That's something that's can offend people. So you have to say it in a very tactful, respectful way that's not going to offend them. How would you say that? There's lots of different ways that you can say that. But without sounding offensive, but also coming across and saying that, you have to do this. And so you need to think about the language and the different ways of saying the same thing, but adapting it to different situations. So have a go and think of different ways you would deal with these situations. Keep a running list of all of these under different headings in a notebook. So you need to write these down. So for example, you would make a heading reassuring a patient. Under that heading, you would write down, or maybe you could write down a few scenarios and then write down different ways of how you would reassure a patient in that scenario. And then you would carry on from that. And keep practicing them in your speaking. Try to mix them up each time. Don't just stick to one way. Don't, like I said at the beginning, don't have like a template that you follow. And so you always say exactly the same thing again and again. Mix it up each time. Don't just stick to one way. Try to adapt some of the sentences so they are appropriate to the scenarios in front of you. And that's the key, really. You need to listen to the patient, understand what they're saying to you, and respond appropriately. And because we would have had all of this, this language bank in your head, you could immediately pick and choose what the appropriate response needs to be for this patient, for this situation. And this will make you more confident in using and adapting language for a particular purpose or a situation. It's very, very important. It's a very important skill that you will need to learn, not just for OET, but for PLAB 2 and beyond. When you are in the country that you wish to move to, you will be using this language. You will be using these skills. So it's well worth practicing these. You are really working on something that will help you, not just for now, but, for your future as well. So keep practicing them until it becomes very natural and you're not having to pause to think about what you need to say. And like I said, it's really well worth doing the work on this because it will help you throughout your career, past OET, PLAB, and into the real world of practice in whichever country that you wish to move to. I hope you found this useful. Like I mentioned, I will do exactly the same thing with relevant examples for IELTS speaking. If you have any questions, you have my email address and other means that you can, other methods of contacting me. And let me know what you think about this episode and if you have any questions. Until the next time, take care.
I really hope you have found this episode useful. Please let me know if you have. I would love to get your feedback. And if there is something you would like me to do an episode on for IELTS or for OET, please just let me know. The details on how you can contact me are in the show notes of this episode. And remember, nothing changes if nothing changes. If you are not willing to change or implement advice and you keep doing the same thing, you will keep getting the same results again and again. Real progress, real improvement comes when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your colleagues and on your social media so that more people can benefit too. Take care and keep working hard.